Hi there, I'm Kelly Palmer and I work at the Institute for Water Research at Rhodes University in South Africa. And we are the host to the African Research Universities Alliance Water Centre of Excellence. Now, the thing that we're doing together is an open courseware course on the adaptive systemic approach. And the course comprises 4 modules, and we've just begun module 1. And Unit 1 is an introduction to the adaptive systemic approach. Now, you've listened to Unit 1.1, and the question that we're going to raise in Unit 1.2 is, what makes the ASA reliable? Why is it reliable? And we raise this question in the context of people living in a catchment, of water falling or rain falling up in the high ground, flowing down to the ocean, people using it for irrigation, for sanitation, in cities, in rural contexts, and for things like spiritual fulfillment and enjoyment, and all sorts of plants and animals associated with water. Now, the adaptive systemic approach is this approach where we are working towards research having a real impact and really benefiting local people. And the reason that we can be confident that the approach works, or one of the reasons we can be confident, is because it comes from a strong theoretical and conceptual foundation. Now, I'm going to be introducing here 3 primary concepts and theories, but there are going to be whole units on each of these. So this is really just an introduction. The first is complexity and complex social ecological systems. The second is transdisciplinarity. And the third is social learning, which can be both transformative and transgressive. Let's think about complexity and complex social ecological systems. What do we mean by a complex social ecological system, or CSES? We're talking about many elements and processes that interact. And people, all sorts of people in every form that people take, interact with many of them in society. And people also interact with the biophysical world, the world where we live with living organisms and ecosystems. And there are also non-living factors like sunshine and water chemistry and water flow. And together, people living with the biophysical environment, all the living and plants and animals and non-living factors together create this complex social ecological system. Why is the word complex important? It's because it's helpful to understand the characteristics of complex systems, because understanding that helps us to have an idea of why people, land and water interact and act the way they do. Now, all complex systems, right from every cell in your body up to the whole global population, comprises many elements. You're an element, I am. So is the tree and the bird and the sea that I can see out the window. There are many elements, both social and biophysical. And these elements interact in processes, and the processes are not always linear. The linear process is where one kind of change produces a predictable and particular response in an orderly way. And many processes in complex systems are not at all linear. As one thing happens, another process could influence it, and the interactions are different from what they might be expected. One of the reasons for this is that there are feedbacks. As you do something, it feeds back into something else. And so the non-linearity is driven by the fact that as one process is going on, it can be affected by another. There's also scale, time, space, and relationships. All are different depending on whether they're at a small scale or a much larger scale. And these processes that happen at different scales have different feedbacks. And so this adds into the complexity of the system. Because of all these things, you might intervene, you might do something in the system. Say you act in order to have a particular outcome. And sometimes you can do something quite small and it has a really unexpectedly large outcome. And sometimes you can invest a huge amount of time and effort and it has a disappointingly small outcome. And this is all because of the nature of the complex system. Now, because of this, the actual specific elements that you're talking about, the context is absolutely critical, because these processes will be different depending on the context in which they are occurring. So context is critical, and because context is shaped by the history, how you got here, therefore an understanding of the history of your context is really important. That's just a snapshot of a CSES, and I hope it makes you look forward to the unit that explains it in more detail. Then let's move on to this idea of transdisciplinarity. You might have heard of disciplines: chemistry, physics, biology, history. These are disciplines of thinking where you learn how to learn about a particular characteristic of the earth or of society, and you learn to do it in a particular way. Now, when you put different ways of working together, you can have interdisciplinary research where people interact with each other, and you can also have multidisciplinary research where you can have all sorts of disciplines all going, doing their particular kind of understanding, hoping at the end to make a more interactive understanding. Now, transdisciplinary research is a little bit different. It strives to make sense of studying from multiple ways of knowing this complex system at the same time. And so it respects and uses multiple knowledges. It uses expert disciplinary knowledge. It uses technical knowledge. It uses emotional knowledge. It uses cultural knowledge. If you're wanting to understand a context, you need to bring much more than an academic disciplinary understanding to it. And that's one of the characteristics of transdisciplinary research. Then transdisciplinary research is problem-focused, and it's focused on wicked or complex or intractable problems. So if we go back to this idea of a complex system and a complex social ecological system, if there are people in society and all the different nuances of society interacting with the many living organisms and non-living factors on the planet, with all of these processes going on, you can understand that when problems happen, you can't solve them with one intervention. You have to do a whole lot of things at the same time to try and shift the problem towards a different state. Now, you also have to have different ways of knowing. There's not going to be just an engineer or just a social scientist who can pay attention to something like pollution and fix it. And so the fact that we're dealing with complex systems and the fact that the problems that emerge in complex systems mean we need multiple knowledges, but we also need to work with and for society. Transdisciplinary research is not something that just happens out of a book or in a university or produces an academic paper or a report. It's a way of working where the process of working is the most important part of it. Yes, it brings expert knowledge to bear. Yes, it is inclusive and brings in traditional knowledge. But most of all, it co-develops knowledge among people in an understanding of a context and its history in order to grapple with difficult problems. Now, what about society and the way it works? And one of the things about people is they learn best together. And so we're talking about social learning. We're talking about how we learn from and with each other towards greater understanding. And Ray Eisen has got a really nice picture of how social learning can work, because what he suggests is while you are working all together and learning from each other in a range of ways, you are also doing things. And this is understanding through doing, learning by doing. And so you start in a particular point with its own history, and you bring a whole lot of knowledge together to look at a problem. And then you start to say, how are we tackling this problem now? And how does our collective understanding of it help us to increase our understanding and to start to act differently? And as we act differently, we change our practice, we shift the situation to a new state. And then we learn some more together. And then we change our practice and we shift our situation to the next different place. And as we change that, a co-learning cycle drives changes in social relationships and catalyzes transformation or a change in the whole place. And so learning together is really important. But now what about this, what might be for you a new word, which is transgressive? To transgress means to go across a line. Why would we be suggesting that we go across, we transgress, we shift quite powerfully into different places? And that's because we need to challenge the conformity of some things. If we're to shift complex problems, we need to confront the fact that very often we exclude people because of age, gender, educational background, income, their social status, the language they speak, the nationality they are, the culture they embrace, and the possibilities they see in the world. And so transgressive social learning means not just accepting the assumptions of what it means to be rural, of what it means to graduate, of what it means to be carrying wood or living in an African city, of the meaning of a fetus or a teenager or a baby or our wise older people, and what it means to beat the drums of Africa. Transgressive means to seek out new ways of understanding. And that's a thumbnail of those important theories and concepts. And the next thumbnail I'm going to be talking to you about is the question of how do we know it's practical? Given all these pie-in-the-sky ideas of multiple knowledges and complex systems, how do we make the changes really practical? And we'll be getting to that in the next subunit.